Yeah. Yeah, you kind of touched on a lot of different things. So as I read back through the book yesterday. I was writing down different thoughts for you. And one of the things one of the thoughts I had is, if we have enough like anecdotal evidence that something's working and it's not hurting anybody, whatever it
Hmm.
is it necessary to debunk it? And it kind of seems like you've already said, well, if it like massage, you talk about massage not really having the whole lactic acid thing is bunk.
Yeah.
So, but it feels good. So is that seems to be good enough, right?
Yeah, so here's my take on it. So I agree that if something's helping people and it's working and it's not harming them, then that's fine. And I don't want to take that away from people. But I do think that it's worth still, debunking pseudoscientific explanations for things because they
Mm-hmm.
sort of distract us. But they also sort of promote this almost like sciencey notion of things where you just sort of
Mm-hmm.
slap some scientific terms on something and it makes it, makes everyone think that it works. I
Right.
think it's also okay to acknowledge sometimes that things can work in ways that we sort of have this idea that if we can quantify it or like there's data or some sort of thing that feels sciency, that that's more legitimate than things like, make putting you into a better mood
Mm-hmm.
or, even just sort of the feeling of like, oh yeah, it feels good. Like that's something that's very hard to quantify feeling good. I mean, you can ask people, you could have these qualitative measures, but we have this idea that, oh, measuring something in my blood or like finding some level that we can absolutely quantify with a quantitative scale
Mm-hmm.
somehow makes it more true. And I think that that sort of can distract our attention away from the things that, in this case, are really important. And I'll just give you an example of that. There has been a lot of work that's been done to sort of look for what is the best measure of recovery because this is a really important question. You want to
Mm-hmm.
know if you're recovered and be able to track this and figure out. And it turns out, I mean, people have looked at everything under the sun, every kind of like measure that you could take in the blood, all kinds of physiological measures, heart rate variability, hormone levels, blood level,
Mm-hmm.
everything you can think of. And nothing, absolutely nothing trumps mood, which
Right.
seems like really counterintuitive. And yet this is a result that's been replicated. And like there have been meta-analyses that have like looked at this and concluded that, really that subjective feeling of well-being is really the best measure of it. And I think any athlete who's ever like towed the line near overtraining sort of knows this. I mean, when you're at training camp and you're going really hard and you're really tired, like you're moody, you're cranky, you don't feel good, you don't feel like training, it's all like these are things we've all sort of experienced. And yet
Mm-hmm.
somehow it's like we don't trust that. People will trust some measure on their watch or they want some number on their app that will tell them this. When in fact, I think, seeking that number or sort of relying on those sorts of things can actually be really dangerous because they can take athletes away from the most important skill that they absolutely need, which is the ability to read their own bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And
And this,
so,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, and the more that you can learn to understand your own body, because this is very individual. So the other thing about um, these measures of recovery is there's been a lot of research on this where they're looking at there's no one thing that I can measure on every athlete that will
Mm-hmm.
tell me, okay, they're becoming overtrained or they're not well rested. On the other hand, every individual will tend to have something or another that sort of fills this role. So for instance, for me, I have come to realize that if I wake up in the morning with just this little hint of a scratchy throat, like a sore throat coming on, I know that that's a sign. Like that's my own body's sign of saying, look, you're overextended, help, we need some rest. And I've
Mm-hmm.
learned this through trial and error. And I can't tell, that may not be the same for you. It may be that the only time you ever, get a sore throat at all is when you're actually getting the flu or something. But I
Mm-hmm.
know that for me, other athletes I've talked to, I have one friend who, when she's starting to feel overtrained, it's always this particular heaviness in her legs that she feels. That's something that I haven't experienced, but I know that for her it's really effective. And so every person has their own thing. I talked to I talk about this in the book, one coach that I interviewed who liked to make friends with his athletes, roommates or spouses. And he had one athlete who, when his wife said he was cranky, he knew it was time to scale down the training. It was like getting to be too much.
Yeah, when you talk about the sore throat, when I read that, I was like, I have a very similar thing where I actually ended up skipping my A race for this year because I was getting a sore throat that week, and I was like, I knew I could probably race and be okay, but if I did, that I would be worse for wear the following week, which was the time I was supposed to go on vacation. So I was like, all right, we'll
Uh,
skip the A race, and but I have another show that's just me I call Runner's High, where I just talk about long distance running and kind of help people learn how to do things involving long distance running. And one of my big things I talk about is RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, and
Oh
trying to like
yeah,
learn RPE, because for me it's like the most important measure of figuring in, like really dialing in every workout and the weeks in terms of making sure you're maximizing load but not going over that cliff. Because
yeah.
I think it was Chris McCormick, who is a long distance triathlete. If you don't know, you probably know who Macca is, but um, I think it was his advice. He said something along the lines of like, if he doesn't feel like getting in the pool when he goes to the pool, he gets in, he does one lap, and if after one lap he still feels like he doesn't want to be in there, he just gets out and goes home. So it's
Yeah,
like always this kind of gut check in terms of how do I feel today, versus let's just focus on heart rate training, or let's just focus
yeah.
on these like objective measures that we can look at.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that that's good, and but it also takes some time to realize because I've had people ask me about this. Some days you wake up and you just don't feel like training, and is that
Mm-hmm.
just because yeah? And most of us think, okay, you, what's wrong with you? Like I must be really, really terrible today. Like and I better double down because I should want to train, and if I don't, something's wrong with me. Well, yeah, something's wrong with me. My body's saying, I need a rest.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think we've all had experiences where you wake up and you're not feeling it or you just don't feel like training, but you go out and you have one of your best days. And
Mm-hmm.
that may not happen until after you sort of warm up or something, but it can be hard to distinguish. And I think that's where, really paying close attention to RPE, paying close attention, keeping a training diary. And this can
Mm-hmm.
be on paper. It doesn't need to be, one of these fancy things, but just
Yeah.
keeping close track of how you're feeling so that you can also sort of look at patterns too, because on any particular day, you can make that call, but you want to be looking at it in terms of like the course of a season and all that too, because it may be, and sometimes you think, okay, my plan this week is that today I really need to do some hard training, but it may be a part of the season where you've been training a lot, you're pretty fit. And it
Mm-hmm.
may be that the better call is like, because it's always a better decision to do too little than to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
Always. I mean, there's no, if ever the question is between one or the other, you want to do less. Um, but at the same time sometimes you want to push through, and so much of this is just learning to understand your body and to read it and to keep sight of sort of those patterns too, so that you don't want to ever do something just because it's on your training plan for that day.
Right. It's kind of an unfortunate reality of RPE and the whole like subjective measure of how do I feel, that it takes experience. Because it's like, I've been competing for 18, 19 years now. And it's like, oh, if I knew now
Right.
back then, it's like, but you can't have known because you didn't have the experience. And it's
Yeah,
catch 22. But that's why I try my best to like relate, okay, if this pace feels like this to me, and these are the kind of physiological indicators I'm feeling for, and try to share some of that stuff. But I know there's going to be other things that other people notice, and yeah, trying
yeah,
to put it all together is just like terribly inefficient to say I feel this way, do you feel that way, and
right.
there's only so much empathy that can be shared verbally.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And I think it
So
can also go the other way sometimes where, it's not only that, some days you're feeling tired and you need to rest. It can be that some days you're feeling really good and you want to push yourself a little bit
mhm.
harder, and like you want to be tuned into your body to know whether like that's the right decision, and like, yeah, I need to do more, because sometimes, you're feeling really good and you need to stop. Like it's better to stop while you're feeling good, but
Mhm.
keeping track of how you're feeling and how you're feeling sort of over short and long periods will help you make better decisions about this stuff.
Yeah, I know in my log, if I have, it has to be like a series of, I feel like crap today, I feel like crap today, I feel like crap,
Yeah.
before we make a decision to say, okay, here's an extra rest day. If it's like,
Yeah.
I just didn't feel it today, it's a single blip, then, and no big deal, we'll probably just continue forward as
Yeah.
planned. My coach and I are pretty dialed in by
Well,
now, but